Hey, what's going on? In this video I'm going to show you how we can use Zustand state manager inside the React application. So these are the topics I'm going to cover in this video. First of all, we are going to quick start section in which we configure our store and then consume the store inside our components. The second section, we are going to create a computed getters inside our store, and then we are going to use Immer middleware to update our deeply nested state object easily, and then we are going to use persist middleware to persist our store inside the local storage or session storage. And in the last thing, I'm going to show you how we can use async operation inside the Zustand store. So without wasting your time, let's get into it. Okay, I open up my Visual Studio Code, and here I have a plain React application, and for the styling stuff I also have installed Tailwind CSS with it. So the first thing I want to do is to install Zustand library. So I open up my terminal and here I say npm I Zustand. And the next thing I want to do is to create a store folder inside this src folder, and inside this folder I'm going to create a file called zustand.ts. And in this file, the first thing I want to do is to create an interface for the shape of our store. So if you are not using TypeScript, you can skip this part. So in this state, we're going to have a counter, which is a number, and also we're going to have an increase function that return nothing. So the next thing I want to do is to create our store. So I'm going to say export const use store. This is the name of store, you can name it whatever you want, equals to create function, which comes from the Zustand library, and set its generic type to our state. And then this create function takes a set function which return an object, and in this object we're going to define our store. So I'm going to say counter and set its initial value to 0, and then define our increase function. So this increase function turns this set function, and this set function in turn takes our state and returns an object which contains the part of the state which are going to be mutated in this function. So we are going to mutate the counter, so I say counter and set it to state.counter +1. So in this way we can mutate our store within a action function. And note that here the state contains the previous value of our store, and we just need to return the part of our state that are going to be mutated in this function, not all our state. So if say we had a counter2 variable here, we wouldn't need to repeat the counter2 variable here inside this returned object. So that's it, and we have successfully created our store. So let's use it in our components. To speed up the process, I'm going to copy and paste a component named counter, which is going to use our Zustand store. So here we have a button element which is meant to increase our counter state, and also a p tag in which we are going to show our counter. So here the first thing I want to do is to select part of our store which we are going to use in this component. So I'm going to say const increase equals to use store, and then this use store takes our state, and then we're going to return part of our state which we are going to select. So we say state dot increase function, and then also const counter equals to use store state, and then return the state dot counter. So in this way we can select part of our store which we are going to use, and then here in the button say on click and use the increase function here, and also in the p tag we are going to use our counter. So let's import this counter inside our app.tsx. Let's save this, also save this. Let's run our server. We got an error here which says missing .react. So here in the Zustand we just need to import the create function from the Zustand. So let's save this and restart our server to see if the error is gone, and yeah, the error is gone. So I open up my browser, and here we can see an increase button and also a counter. So let me make it bigger. So if I click on the increase, you can see that the counter state is going to increase. Note that unlike the Redux or context API, in order to access the store, we don't need to wrap our component inside a provider. And that's it. We have successfully configured the Zustand store with our project. In this section, we're going to make our store a little more complex. So I'm doing this by adding a to-do section into our application. So the first thing I want to do in the Zustand.ts file, in our store file, we're going to add a interface which describes the to-do object. So I'm going to say export interface to-do, and this to-do going to have an ID, which is a number, also a title, which is a string, and also a completed, which is a boolean. So that's simple. And next, inside the state interface, which describes the shape of our store, I'm going to add another member called to-dos, which is going to be a list of to-do items. And then we are going to add a couple of actions, one for adding a to-do. So I'm going to say add to-do, which is a function that takes a to-do item, and then add it to the to-dos list and return nothing. The second action we're going to add is set completed. So I say set completed, which is a function that takes the ID of to-do and then completed, which is going to be a boolean, and then return nothing. So in our store, useStore, we're going to add to-dos and set its initial value to an empty array, and then implement our add to do and set completed functions. So add to do is a function which takes a to do item, then return the set function which takes our state, and then return an object. And in this object, we're going to mutate our to-dos list. So we are going to return new to-dos list into our store. So we're going to say to-dos and set it to an array which contains list of our previous to-dos item. So I'm going to spread our state to-dos and also new to-do item. And that's it. And second, we're going to implement our set completed function here, which takes a ID of to-do item, which is going to be a number, and also completed, which is going to be a boolean, and then return the set function that takes our state. And this set function finally must return a object that we are going to mutate in our store. First, we are going to find our to-do item. So I'm going to say const to-do equals to state dot to-dos dot find, then accept a function which returns the element with the ID of our ID parameters. So first we find our specific to-do that we are going to mutate, and then we are going to say if find to-do, then to-do dot complicated is going to be the complicated argument here, and then return the object that contain our mutated state. So we're going to say to-dos and set it to a array of state dot to-dos. So in this way, we are going to say that our to-dos item has been mutated. So the components that using the to-dos item must be re-rendered. And we have an error here which says that the ID is incompatible. So here ID is number, and in the state interface, I set the type of ID to to-do item. So it was wrong. The type of ID must be in type of number. So if I save this, the error is gone, and now we have a little more complex store here. Of course, we could separate our store in a way that we can have use counter store and also use to-do store. But for the sake of simplicity, in this video, I'm going to merge them together in one store. So now that we have integrated the to-dos functionality into our store, let's use them in our components. So I'm going to create a component in our component folder named add to-do, So I'm going to paste it here. As you can see, this is a kind of simple form that has an text box which is responsible for taking the title of new to do, and also a button which is responsible for adding a new to do. So here the first thing we're going to do is to select our add to do function from our store. So I'm going to say const add to do equals to use store, then take our state and then select our state dot add to do. So next we're gonna implement the onAdd function here. So I'm gonna say const onAdd equals to function, and in this function we're gonna call our add to do function and then pass a new to do item. So I'm gonna say ID, its ID is equal to new date dot get time, and set its title to do title and it's completed to false because it's a new one, and then set the to do title to a empty string. So now let's add the add to do here in the app.tsx file, and then go back to our browser, and you can see the component here which is responsible for adding a new to do. So if I add a to do item, for example reading a book, it is going to be added to our store. So now let's quickly implement a to do list here in our application. So I'm going to create a component here in the component folder called to do's list. And inside this to-do list, first of all, I'm going to select our to-dos from our store. So I'm going to say const to-dos equals to use store, take our state, and then return the state.todos. Then inside the JSX, I'm going to add a title which says that it's a to-do list components, and then iterate through the to-dos items and render them to the JSX. So I'm going to add a div here with the key of to-do.id, and then inside that div I'm going to add a p tag here which shows the to-dos.title, and also a checkbox. So I'm going to say an input with type of checkbox, and inside the checkbox we're going to bind its value to the to do that completed, and also on its onChange event we're going to call our set completed function which comes from our store, the target.checked. So now let's select our set completed function here. So I'm going to say const set completed equals to use store, take our state, and then return state dot set completed. And here in the set completed function we're going to add the to do ID of the current ID and also the value of this checkbox, so we can set it completed to check or not checked. And for the sake of time, let's copy and paste the CSS classes into our JSX. And yeah, I think we're done here. So let's add the to-dos list into our app.tsx file. So we're gonna here say to-do list, and then go back to our browser, and you can see that reading a book here is already added to our store. So we can check the completed property of this to-do item by checking this checkbox here. So if I check this checkbox, you can see that the style of this title is going to change, and if I uncheck it, it backs to its original state. And now let me add another to-do item here. For example, go to work. You can see that go to work is added to our to-do list component, and we can mark it as completed or not by checking these checkboxes here. So that's it for this section. In this section, we want to add a getCompleted function to our store, which returns only the to-dos items which has been marked as completed. So first of all, in the state interface of our store, we're going to add a function called getCompleted. So I'm going to say getCompleted, which is going to be a function that returns a list of to-dos. And now inside our store, let's implement that function. So we're going to say getCompleted, and this function must return the to-dos item that has been marked as completed. So in order to return the part of our to-dos item, we can add another function in the create method here called get, which comes from the Zustand. And this get function, we can select and return part of our store that we want to. So I say get.todos.filter and filter the element that it's completed has been marked as true. So in that way, we can access to our to-dos list and filter them and then return them to the component that's selecting this getCompleted function. So now let's add another component here called completed. Let's create a functional component here, and inside it, let's select the completed to-dos from our getCompleted function inside the store. So I'm going to say const completed equals to useStore, and then return the state dot getCompleted. Now here we have to call getCompleted method. So we add the parentheses here. So if we don't add parentheses here, we actually select the getCompleted function. But here we want to select the return value of this getCompleted function. So here, instead of just selecting that function, we're going to call it and select the return value of that getCompleted function. So let's use it in the main.jsx here. We can loop through the completed just as before. Turn a div which its key set to to-do.id, and then return a paragraph here which contains the to-do.title. And again, for the sake of time, let me copy and paste the CSS classes here and also a title for this component. So that's it for this component, and let's import it to our app.tsx file. Let's go back to our browser and add a to-do item. Let's add another. And if I check one of these to-dos item, it's automatically added to the completed to-do item. So this completed to-do components select part of the to-dos list that has been marked as completed. And if I uncheck it, it's going to remove from the completed to-do items. So let's check this one, and you can see this one is added to the completed. And let's check both of them, and you can see both of them are added to the completed to-do item. So in this way, we can define kind of getter function that returns part of our state based on a logic that we want to include into our application. So to integrate the Immer middleware into our store, the first thing I want to do is to import the Immer middleware from the Zustand/middleware/Immer. And here, the first thing I want to do is to remove the generic type from the create function. And inside the create function, I'm going to add Immer and then add the generic type of our store into the Immer middleware. And then add a parenthesis here, and then wrap our whole store with a parenthesis here. So now we can take advantage of the Immer functionality inside our store. So now we can directly mutate our states inside our action function. So here, instead of returning an object which contains our new state, we just mutate our state. So here we can remove this return object here, and just inside the set function we are mutate our states. So I'm going to say state.counter ++. That's it. Inside add to do function, here instead of returning the new to do's array, let's get rid of them. We just push the new item into our state.todos. As you can see, the Immer middleware transforms our state from the immutable to mutable. So we can directly mutate our state within the actions. For the set completed action, here we can delete this return function. So here we just find our specific to do item with the ID parameters and then set its completed to the completed parameter. That's it. We don't have to return an object that contains our new to do items. And yeah, that's it. That's simple. We just add middleware function just like here, and then we can mutate directly our state and treat them just like a mutable variable, which is a really cool feature that simplifies our actions. So let's save this and go back to our browser to check the functionality. So let's add a to do item here. So I'm going to say go to work, for example. Let's add them, and you can see it's added to our list. Let's check them as completed, and you can see that it worked just like before. And let's increase the counter state, and you can see that our state works just as before. So here you can see that if I reload the page, our state is going to disappear. In order to solve this problem, we can persist our store into the local storage or session storage. So let's do that in action. So to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is to import the persist middleware from the Zustand/middleware. And then wrap our whole store with the persist function. So I'm going to call the persist and then wrap our definition of our store inside the persist middleware. So this persist middleware takes two parameters. One, the definition of our store, which you can see here, and the other, which is an object which contains the configurations for our storage. So here we must add a name to our storage, just an arbitrary name. I say to do store or to do storage. You can name it whatever you want. And next we can specify where to persist our store. So we can say get storage function, and this function returns either local storage or session storage. The default is local storage. If we wanted to persist our store into the local storage, we can simply get rid of this get session. But if we want to persist our store in the session storage, we can specify here that get storage return session storage. So if I save this and go back to our browser, add a to do item here, add it and increase our counter, and now if I refresh the page, you can see that our state is in place. Again, mutate our store and then refresh this, and we can see that our store is in place again. So we can change it to local storage, and now go back to the browser and increase our function and also add a to do here, add it to our store, and now refresh the page, and you can see again after refreshing the page our store is in place. So this is a very easy way to persist our store inside the local storage or session storage in our React application. And you know what, if you wanted to implement this functionality inside the Redux store, that would be a complex one. The last thing I want to show you is how we can use async operation inside our Zustand store. if you're familiar with the Redux, if you want to use async operation inside your Redux store, you have to use async functions, which are kind of complicated in my opinion. But here Zustand doesn't care if your action are async or not. So you can easily do async operations inside your Zustand actions. Okay, now let me quickly create an async action inside our Zustand store. Imagine that we want to fetch a list of to-dos from a backend API. So the first thing I want to do here is to define a function called fetch_todos. This function returns nothing. And then inside our store, we're going to implement this fetch function. So I'm going to say fetch_todos and then say async, because this is an async action. And then inside it, we're going to say const res equals to await fetch API, and then put the API address and set its method to get. Then I'm going to say const response equals to await res.json, just as you do in normal async functions. And then we have response. We can call set function. So I'm going to say set and then set our to-dos with the response. I'm going to say response.todos. So let's save this and go to the app.tsx, and on the top of it, I'm going to create a button. Name it fetch to-dos, and then here we're going to select the fetch to-dos from our store. So we say const fetch to-dos equals to our use store state, then state that fetch to-dos. And here inside the onClick event of this button, we can call our fetch to-dos. So let's save this and go back to our browser. And if I click on the fetch to-dos, you can see the list of to-dos here, but it doesn't show its title. So it's because inside this API, the to-dos doesn't have a title. It's called to-do. We have to rename this title to to-do. So I'm going to rename it to to-do. And then if I go back to the browser, you can see that our to-dos is already here. So in this way, we can do async operation inside our Zustand action. So as I said, the Zustand doesn't care if the actions are async or not. So yeah, I think that's it for today, and in the next video we are going to practically compare the Redux store with the Zustand store. And if you liked the video, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell button. See you in the next one. Bye bye.